can just explain to everybody how we got on in round one with the implementation of the independent TMO process and it went from your point of view. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your interest and time this morning. Just briefly, after 3 years of research and working closely with technology providers over a 3-year period, as URC, we investigated what is a fit for purpose for our environment as a competition to do the next step and work closely with World Rugby to promote the TMO protocols and what's available currently as trial laws, and to participate in World Rugby's trial of how do we expand the role of the TMO and how we deal with foul play. On the back of that, we got to a point where we have suitable technology where we could apply what's required by World Rugby for this trial. In the Northern Hemisphere, we've implemented a Hawkeye system and of technology that we use for reviews. And in South Africa, we have the MOBI system that's been in place for a couple of years now. Those two systems allows us to then participate in the law trial with World Rugby. We are accountable to World Rugby to give them feedback on our processes and how it's going. We've got a meeting on Friday to discuss with World Rugby the technology and the standards and minimum standards that we apply. So this came of very hard work from my colleague Paul Later over 3 years. World Rugby URC has approved, and we have implemented it in round one. There was a lot of work going on. We had to put in place video operational rooms where all the technology is being stored and made available, and during the game where all the live camera feeds go into that room. And we have now a technical operator with our TMO that sits next to him and supports the TMO to independently from the broadcaster find the footage to look at of incidents in the game where injuries has occurred, where there was a suspicion of foul play, and when there was difficulty for the match officials to observe accurate decisions for the awarding of a scrum, a foot that's in touch that wasn't visible to them live, and support them with the accuracy of those decisions. We did a lot of training with our TMO group in the usage of the technology. We've done a lot of training with our TMOs to understand the processes. World Rugby has given us dispensation last year to also use the extended TMO protocol to apply in our competition, which means that the TMO can look in the background while the game continues for important and key decisions that was not accurately dealt with by the referees, to support the referee in their decision making to be accurate. I think what is important to say at this stage, it's never the intention for the TMO to make the decisions. It's still the referee to make the decisions, but with support, we can bring attention to the referee where they weren't accurate, and then support the referee with the accurate of decisions, which is hugely important for us as match officials and hugely important for the teams and the players on the pitch. That's just in a nutshell. Our process is that we now have the opportunity to, while the game is running live, that we can look at all the camera angles that's provided by our broadcasters. While the broadcaster is still showing the game, we can then independently, there's 2 people that now can collate some video footage of incidents to be reviewed and to see if that needs to be brought to the attention of the referee for a decision from the referee. These recommendations will be made, and in the review process, there can be a recommendation from the TMOs because of the footage and the additional information and facts that we have available in that process. Why do we call it the independent process? Previously, as a TMO group in our work, we were dependent on the broadcaster to rewind and replay incidents to us for us to review, or we only had a 5-second delayed screen to have a second look at the incident that we've briefly seen that may require attention. we are now at a place where we do not have to bother the broadcaster with that, but we can independently look at it, and the broadcaster continue to deliver a quality production for the viewers, and we can in the background do our work and pick and find what we call the key angle of incidents that we can put in front of the referee to make an accurate decision. Bit of background, it's a bit different what you will see in other competitions. Our neighboring competitions with Premiership and the French top 14 competition do not have that facilities available. Their decision-making processes and things go still as per usual through the broadcaster, replaying footage to the TMO, find the best footage, then look at it again, then make a decision. We try to slimline our process to make it quicker, to make it faster. We are still dependent on the broadcaster to present that on the screen for the referee to look at. But in finding the key angle for the referee to make an accurate decision, that process is now for us much quicker. And we're not bothering the broadcaster to look for that. We look for it, and then we communicate with the broadcaster to make sure that we put the best footage on screen for those decisions. After round one, we are pretty excited about this process. There was some growing pains that we had to deal with in the background, but there were some good solutions being found after round one. I don't think anybody has seen any issues in particular in any of the games, but we are quite excited for where we can go with this process and what it offers to us as a competition to get accurate calls, which is hugely important for the game, for the stakeholders, for the players and the teams, and in general for our competition's credibility of match official decision making.
That's great, Taba. Thank you very much. Guys, just the initial topics that we just want to center on will be the process Taba's just asked on, if you have any questions, and also the 20-minute red card. And then anything outside of that, once we've covered those two topics, people are free to ask. So if you want to use the raise hand function, I can start directing people to Taba now. So I see a big group of people on the call, but nobody with their hands up for any questions. So Jan de Koning, thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Taba, thanks for chatting to us again. I did listen to the Taba. I think you answered one of the questions I had. The other question is not on your two topics. It's more around the scrums. Have there been directive to referees to go in a certain direction in terms of the scrums? And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've found that there's a lot of cases where the referee asked the scrum half to play quicker, and when teams look to get advantage, and the scrums seem to be to get the ball out quicker rather than make the scrum a contest. Am I incorrect? Has there been a directive to speed up the scrum process?
Yeah, Jan, good morning. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for that question. I appreciate the question from the territory it comes from. We understand the South African teams enjoy scrummaging. Jan, there's no directive to be outside of law or changed or not allow scrummages to be a contest. It's pretty straightforward from the match official point of view. After the ball has been won in the scrum, and it is at the back of the scrum for 3 to 5 seconds, and the scrum has not started to move forward, the referee can call use it. How do we allow teams to apply pressure and apply their scrum power in the scrum? We allow teams to keep the ball in the second row, and that gives them a little bit more time to start to work pressure. We know scrum dominance doesn't come at the moment when you put the ball in. It is a process of applying pressure and pressure and pressure until the pressure breaks. We understand that as match officials, but the teams cannot sit there for a long time and wait for momentum to come. So we allow the teams to keep the ball in the second row and apply their pressure, and then they need to start to work the ball back if that forward momentum doesn't start to happen. Once it gets to the back of the scrum, and it's still not moving forward for 3 to 5 seconds, the referee then calls use it, and the team is expected to play the ball away in a reasonable time. I hope that answers your question, Jan.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the teams need to adjust. If I read you correctly, the teams need to adjust. If they want to take more time, they need to keep it in the second row.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jan. Over to Neil and followed by Stephen afterwards.
Yeah, good morning. Do you feel that this independent way is the way forward for video match officials? And in layman's terms, is it like the VAR, would you say, in football is a good way of describing it?
Morning, Neil. Thank you for your two questions. Just firstly about, is it the way forward? Yes, it is the way forward. The game has become very challenging for individual to live make accurate calls. The challenges is becoming faster, quicker. The teams are smarter. The teams play the boundaries smartly, and individual that needs to deal with everything that happens on the pitch becomes almost impossible. And support for accuracy of decisions is important. The second point to that question, Neil, the whole world sees there's something has happened. And unfortunately, at that moment, the referee didn't have sight of it. It's a knock on that leads to a crucial try that changes the score in the game. Why can't we not help the match official to also see what the rest of the world is seeing? And it doesn't make sense to people watching the game if they see they have access to information that the referee at a crucial time in the game unfortunately didn't see properly or was unsighted because of a player in front of you, whatever the reason is. And that's the way forward, and that's the expectation of the professional game, is to be as accurate as we can, but not be over-officious in using it to bring more decisions into the game, but just more accuracy into the game. Neil, and that's why I fully support this, as this is where the future lies. Technology, we can't be better than technology, and if we can apply technology to bring fairness and accuracy to our game, I'm fully forward and for moving forward, fully on board, and strongly believe that that's the right direction to go.
Do you feel that this independent way will actually prove to be better than the system that they use in the Premiership via the broadcaster and in the top 14 via the broadcaster?
Yeah, Neil, our challenges is a bit different across the different territories that our competition takes place. In Pro 14, it's a French broadcaster that works consistently all the games. In Premiership, it is BBC or the broadcasters that they use in BBC across all their games. There's consistency, there's good understanding, everything happens in the same way, it's the same territory. So our challenge is a bit different. We're working across different territories, we're working across different broadcasters, we're working across different cultures of the game, and the need of how the broadcasts are being presented and things is different in each, and we respect that. We do not want to change that. Broadcasters know best what their clientele wants and what they want to see. And we don't want to interfere with that, but we have a job to do in the background, and allowing the broadcaster to do their role and we doing our role, and then we merge to get the best outcome and to get to a good decision. That to me is the best process as it is at the moment. And while we have those challenges across different territories, that is our way that we're going to bridge that without disrupting the normal broadcast productions that they deliver to their clients and to their viewers, but also using that as part of our technology to improve our match official decision making. I hope that makes sense to you, Neil.
Yeah, just one last thing. I know I only had two, but it's just something I wanted to follow up on. How many angles do you get of each incident?
Neil, it depends on what the broadcaster have in place and what they are bringing to the table and how many cameras they're using on the day. That determines how many, but it can be anything from 6 up to 12, up to 14. World Cup final was 36. We do have access to that, and we can put that on screen. But just to give an idea, within URC, it will be anything from 6 to whatever is available on the day. Our final last year gave us a lot of additional angles that we usually don't have in our pool rounds. The final displayed at Croke Park, so then we have more access, but in general, 6+.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Neil.
Just to add, Neil, just from the broadcaster perspective. So every angle that is live on a match day, that is going into the system. So we'd have a minimum spec of sort of 8 to 9 cameras. And then, it's optional on some games. Broadcasters will increase that. A lot of the derby games, the bigger games, will have probably up to 12. One or two of those camera angles probably won't be very useful if they're from a long distance away, but the referee would have, or the TMO would have access to those. And then just to explain a little bit more, just to add on to what Tapa would have said, the process traditionally would be that we would have a TMO who would have 2 screens. One would be live and one would be on a 7-second delay. So that may still be what's working in France or in England. I can't speak to the exact nature of how it works with those guys. But in our system, they were on a 7-second delay screen and a live screen. And then, so if they saw something, they checked the delay screen, and that's when they would go asking the video operator to queue up some different angles. They would know where all the cameras are. So that's a manual process. They've got to talk to somebody. They've got to rewatch something. In the new world, they have a bank of screens in front of them, and they can immediately go and watch a replay from whatever angle they want in real time as soon as they see something. So that's going to cut down a lot of time. And then just to the point Tapa was saying around being in different territories, the consistency that the guys in with TNT Sports and Premiership Rugby would have, or Prem Rugby would have, is that, the TMO operators and the broadcast staff are probably very familiar with each other, and they see each other quite often. The same, I would imagine, applies in France. In the URC, we will have TMOs from Ireland working in South Africa and vice versa, and in Wales and in Scotland, and people moving around. And therefore, they may not see the broadcast colleagues as often as they might do in other countries. So again, that was just another element, relationships and understandings, interpretations, languages, accents, all these sorts of things. They can add seconds to these kind of circumstances. So by bringing in this technology, we put so much control into the TMO's hands, and we leave less room for things to be lost in translation, etc. Is that fair enough, Tapa?
Yeah, Adam, thank you so much for adding that. I didn't want to go too deep into the technical stuff, but thank you for
I can tell Neil's dying to get stuck into the technical stuff. So
thanks, Adam.
Fine. And he was very polite, trying not to use up his quota of questions. So, Stephen Nell, over to you next.
Cool, thanks. I think you partly answered my question. And what I just want to do more or less ascertain is whether there's a sort of a minimum standard that a broadcaster has to be able to give you. That there are X amount of angles. So yeah, but I think you, in a sense, covered some of that. But just your thoughts on that. Thank you.
A World Rugby would dictate that you have to have all 4 corners bare minimum covered for TMO. And then I think for competitions of our level, you need at least a minimum of 6 for general coverage. But again, we would exceed that on every game, and a lot of our games there's upgraded camera specs. So yeah, and then also depending on the stadiums, Stephen, obviously you guys have a couple of absolutely world-class stadiums in South Africa, so it's much easier to put extra cameras into DHL Stadium than it might be in other stadiums in the UK and Ireland and things like that. So so some regular games can have 12 plus cameras on them as well, but a lot of the derby games will get turned up, and also the playoffs and the grand final, as Tapa mentioned earlier.
Cool, thanks guys.
Thank you, Stephen.
There we go. Anyone for any questions on? Yeah, Simon Thomas, followed by Jan.
Thanks, Di. Hi, Tapa. How are you? Good to see you again.
Hi, Simon.
Just can I ask you one specific? It's kind of related to the Licata, number 8 for Zebra, who got a red card on the weekend. Tell me if I got the sequence of this wrong, but Ben Whitehouse was refereeing and sent him for a bunker review because it met the yellow card threshold, and it came back and it was upgraded to a red. And I think the words Ben used were high degree of danger, no mitigation. Now, as I understand it, if Ben had made that decision himself instantly, he could have given a permanent red card in the sense that it was dangerous and always illegal. But we don't have the system where that can be adjudged by the bunker. Is that right? That it can only be a permanent red card if the match referee gives it? And if so, why doesn't the bunker review have that option?
Yeah, Simon, yeah, thank you. Good question. The first part of the question is on the difference between a permanent red card and a 20-minute red card. Just to sum it up and try to simplify it a bit, is that you rightly said, if it's always illegal or deliberate or intentional by the player doing something that the law does not allow. And if I say that the law does not allow a shoulder charge, the law does not allow a punch, a headbutt, eye gouge, the law specifically, that's not part of the game. Where the 20-minute red card comes in is where a player is trying to do something that the law allows. The law allows you to tackle. The law allows you to clear out, but the player get it technically wrong. That's where we differentiate a bit, and that's where the big difference lies between a permanent red card immediately given by the referee, when it's clear and obvious to them that there was a deliberate or intentional act of foul play or always illegal foul play that has happened. The part where it meets the yellow card threshold is where it's clear that the player wanted to play legally in the game, to execute a clear out or a tackle, and they got it technically wrong, or for the contest in the air where the player gets it technically wrong and it ends up dangerous to the opponent, and then the degree of danger decides and determines whether it goes to a yellow card threshold that will be reviewed with more time and information and facts available to be reviewed properly to make the fairest decision and the best decision for that circumstance. And that's where the TMO will review. So it doesn't take away the power of the referee to give a red card, but only the referee can give a permanent red card for that act of foul play that they have observed after they have consulted with the TMO and his ARs and had look at reviews. He can give that 20-minute a full red card. A yellow card cannot be upgraded by a TMO to a full red card. The referee has that discretion for the full red card. The TMO can only upgrade to a 20-minute red card for something that the referee has referred that is part of the game, but has technically gone wrong in the execution. The player is still accountable, but the game is not going to be penalized for the rest or the duration of the game, only for 20 minutes. I hope that answers your question, Simon. If it doesn't, please ask another question.
I just don't understand. Why did you decide that you wouldn't give the TMO the possibility of himself describing, or perhaps the referee didn't quite see that? I've looked at that. That really shouldn't merit a full permanent red card. Why did you not give that level of power to the TMO bunker review?
Simon, the current law trial is that what World Rugby wants the process to be? I will not give a personal opinion around that. Our competition is aligned to the expectations of World Rugby and to support them in the law trials and provide information as much as we can. I'm pretty sure that will be discussed, Simon. This is still a law trial, and this is important to know, that this whole process with 20-minute red cards and foul play review officers and things is still a law trial for World Rugby to make a final decision when it will become permanent law in our professional competitions where it's possible. So we are using that now to explore all possibilities to come up with the best fit for purpose law that World Rugby will decide on once they have all the information and data in front of them, as we as competitions feedback into World Rugby. So I'm pretty sure, Simon, it will be discussed in future, but as it stands at the moment, World Rugby want us to make that differentiation on permanent red card and 20-minute red card. I hope it makes sense, Simon.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Just one other one for me. I was at the Arms Park on Saturday when Ben Thomas got a 20-minute red card when on review. tell me if I'm wrong, but that one to me struck me as perhaps being an example of just what you've been looking for in terms of the multiple angles. Because I think the first three angles of the incident, you couldn't see that there was upper arm contact to the head.
Yeah.
And it felt like probably last season, those first couple of replays would have been shown and it would have been just maybe a yellow. But that little bit of extra footage seemed to enable you to give the right decision. Is that fair, that perhaps is an example of what you're talking about with every angle being explored?
Yeah, Simon, that's a very good example of where the key angle that decides the decision was found after 3 or 4 replays from the other camera angles. It's a good example of what the key angle is and what the difference is. The time it took to get to the key angle and get the key angle on screen, we can improve on that, and because that's part of our process is to make it more fluent and quicker. But we are sorting out those teething problems to get that key angle quicker and faster on the screen for that decision. In this process, there was time to reflect again and to absolutely make sure that the player was trying something legitimate and legal to clear out, and then on the last moment, it didn't go well for that player in his attempt, and that was determined, and that's a very good example, Simon, to use as what this process is all about. And then also adding to that, we would like that to happen a little bit quicker. It was still taking a bit of time, but we are getting good relationships with our broadcasters and good understanding how we're gonna make that more fluent and happen a little bit quicker. Very, very good example. Thank you.
That's fine. But just one technical thing. The TMO, you talk about being in a room looking at these angles. In every game, still, the TMO is at the venue. That's right. It's not like, like VAR has like a remote bunker room, but all your TMO work is always done at the grounds this season. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Simon. All our TMO work is at the stadium. As the game takes place, there's a meeting with the TMO and the broadcaster. Before the game, there's meetings with the referee and the TMO to make sure that they are all aligned to their expectations. What is on offer on the day, how many cameras, where the cameras are situated, camera plans and things are being shared. So there's a lot of things and work that happens like 2 or 3 hours before kickoff, setting everything up and make sure that everybody is aligned and understand what it is. So yes, we have VOR rooms in each and every one of our stadiums across the 16 clubs. And the clubs has been really, really supportive in getting this in place for their teams and for their players and our processes that we are bringing into it. So we're really thankful for the clubs for making those spaces available for us to have a video operator room, as we call it, or a video operations room for where the TMO and his support can then review those things. So yeah, Simon, you're right. Every stadium do have their video operational room.
Great, that's very informative. Thanks again for your time, Tapper. Thank
you, Simon. Thanks for your questions.
Thanks, Simon. Over to Jan and then Caniso after that.
Thanks. Tapper, yeah, just another one from me. The other thing I've noticed this weekend is, and I know there's always frustrations on every game, but there seems to be a lot more respect. Is that because of the channel of communication that it's improved? Because I know that players still question, but there's a lot less chirping, if you want to say. Is that because the channels have improved, or is that just the players accept that the referee is in charge?
Jan, yeah, thank you. A very good observation, and thank you for asking the question and highlighting that you've seen something different. At the start of season, we had a good preparation with the coaches, and one of the points that World Rugby has actually asked us as competitions is to build good relationships and provide opportunity for the captain, when relevant, to then ask the referee a question. We have then agreed with the coaches that if the captains do it in a amicable way and with respect, that we will focus to what their needs are and to understand their need, and we will make our best effort to then answer the need of the captain, so that they understand either the decision or the reason for not a decision. And we said that it shouldn't stop the game, and it shouldn't become a focus point in the game the way that we do it. And we've worked out systems. And for instance, after a try has been scored, the captain won't walk in front of the kicker to go and challenge the referee about something. If he gets a message from the sideline, he will go to the AR and mention it to the AR, that will relay it to the referee, and the TMO will also hear that message, and the referee will relay to the TMO. Why everything continues, that message will be relayed in a much better way than what we previously seen, the captains walking out and getting first. I'm really pleased, and I have to be really thankful to the coaches that has bought into this. It's good for our game that there's good relationships on the pitch between captains and match officials. We understand that captains is in the heat of the moment. They are fighting for their team to win. They're giving everything for their team, and they sometimes disagree with the referee decision that upsets them a bit. But we're getting to a point where we are trying to deal with it in a professional manner, with respect from both ends, so that we can get the best outcome and understanding for that game. We may still disagree with the decision, Jan, but what we're asking is we will give a good explanation of what it is, and then we can have further discussions afterwards to then move forward and learn from it if we need to make some adjustments either on our side or on the team side. But that relationship is now becoming hugely important of managing the game between the two captains and the referee. And thank you for asking that question, and your observation is spot on.
Thanks, Topper.
Thanks, Jan. Canyiso?
Thank you very much, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is well. Tapa, speaking on observations, can you just take me through how you're feeling about how the non-contestable line-out part is working, especially with the throwing, because it's become slightly apparent that with teams in particular that now there's a lot of planning regarding the contestation of skew line-out throws and how it's become a full part of planning instead of actually the line-out throwing being as straight as possible.
Yes, Canyiso, thank you so much. A good question of one of the law changes that has happened, and it's not a massive change. What is allowed, if a player is now allowed, and the law wording as it's been changed, allows a player to throw the ball towards a player in the line-out. Previously, there was an expectation that the ball should be thrown down the middle. Then it changed that the ball should be thrown down a band of 1 meter. Then it was accepted if it's on the inside shoulder. And that is where our perimeters is, that you can throw the ball towards the inside shoulder of your player jumping for that ball. That means that you've thrown it towards your player and it's not straight down the middle of the line out. If you throw it further than from the inside shoulder towards the middle or to the outside shoulder, then it will be judged as a not straight throw, or as you say in South Africa, a skew throw. But it will judge as a not straight throw, provided that the opposition is jumping to contest for that ball. Now, there's 2 or 3 exceptions to it. The first exception is if you throw the ball to a player at the front of the line out, and there's no jumping contest required to contest that ball, then you have to still throw it within the inside shoulder, and you cannot throw it directly to the player. If that happens on a short throw, it will be judged as a crooked throw or a not straight throw. If you throw it a long throw over the 15-meter line, and you do not throw it within those perimeters that I've described now between the inside shoulders of the 2 teams, then it will also be called as a crooked throw because there's no jumping contest for possession of the ball. I hope that answers the question for you, Canyiso. Do teams try to exploit those boundaries? Yes, they do. What do we expect from our referees? We expect our referees to set boundaries early for both teams to understand the boundaries of what's acceptable. And then it's the judgment of the referee within those boundaries to allow the teams to play within those boundaries that is set early in the game. Thank you, Canyiso.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Padraig.
Just a quick question, just on the introduction of the 20-minute red card. Was there ever like a thought given that red card, say like top 14 have gone to an orange card, so there's that visual difference for especially newcomers of the game who are used to a red card? That team is now reduced to player for the duration of the game. Because I knew with a 20-minute card, someone comes back, just give that visual change up in the knowledge, the language we all know about sport in general.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you for the question. No, we've never considered to bring an orange card into our environment. We are trying to be as much aligned to World Rugby and what we've seen in test matches, where a yellow card with a cross arm means it's up for review. Our process may be a little bit different, rather from going to a bunker with a foul play review officer, just goes to TMO, but it means that there's foul play being referred, and we are aligned to what that World Rugby process is. Also, the delivery of the 20-minute red card will be a red card with a cross arm, which shows that was the review that's been upgraded to a 20-minute red card. When the referee shows only the red card, that means red card, and we are aligned with that. It's interesting about the perimeters that the French competition is putting in place for their domestic competition, the top 14. I have seen that, and I fully understand why they're doing it. And if it's sensible and it's agreed by everyone, we may go that way. But we are at this stage, our process is aligned to what people see in Test rugby, what they're going to see in November, what they're going to see in what they saw in the Lions Test, what they saw in November window, what they're going to see in Six Nations, pretty much aligned processes. So we're trying to do it with the least disruption. I'm pretty sure that's what we will see in EPCR as well. So that is why we decided not to explore an orange card or a blue card or a white card or a different color card. We would like to be aligned and keep the continuity for our viewer supporters to look at it, that they understand what they're looking at. Hope that makes sense, Patrick.
No, that's perfect. And just one other thing on the TMO review. You mentioned there's a team in that bunker with them. Say if there's something under review and there's another incident, how does those two concurring incidents get taken care of in terms of TMO review process?
Thanks. Good question. Very good question, Patrick. I'm so pleased you asked that question. That is where our technology that's now been applied comes into play. We can timestamp every incident, and immediately we can revisit that timestamp, and we can loop that incident in our own time. And if there's another incident, we can timestamp, and that incident is then available for us to look at when we feel it's appropriate. If it is an incident that needs immediate attention, that will become priority. We can park the other incident if we have still 6 or 7 minutes of the 8 minutes to review, and we can then immediately give attention to the next incident, be it a deliberate knock-on, be it a dangerous tackle. It's been timestamped, it can be reviewed, and we will just determine the priority of which decision do we need immediate attention, which decision still do we have some time to have that available. Everything that we timestamp during a game on the system forms a playlist, and we can revisit that playlist anytime during the game. During halftime, what we do is we actually then streamline it nicely of which ones was major ones. And so this system allows us to actually do a lot of things at the same time. And the only thing that we will need to do is to determine the priority, which call goes first and deserves the attention and an outcome ahead of the other incident, or the second, third, or fourth incident that might come along.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Tapas. Really, really clear, concise explanations there as well. So, okay, guys.
Simon Thomas, sorry, Adam, I see a hand from Simon Thomas.
I think Simon's is still up from earlier, potentially.
Yeah, I'm fine, Tapper. All done. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
If there are any questions outside of independent TMO or 20-minute red cards, we have a few minutes now. You can still put them, but if everybody is happy, we can draw close to proceedings. So do stick your hand up in the next 5 seconds if you've anything else to ask Tapa. It's our equivalent of the use it. So Neil, you got in just before I blew the whistle, so over to you.
I just want to talk about Holly Davidson. She refereed the World Cup final on Saturday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How proud are you to have her as part of your officials. And can you just speak a little bit about her development and how far you think she can go? Could we conceivably ever see her, in your view, referee the Men's World Cup final?
Neil, thank you so much for that question. It's a question close to my heart. I was in a role with Scottish Rugby when we started the process with Holly. Part of my role was to identify talent and put in place a talent identification program with Scottish Rugby to identify talented referees to support Scottish Rugby in the development of high performance referees towards Tier 1. She basically started at the same time when Mike Adamson was identified and Sam Grove-White was identified within the Scottish environment, and some other referees that was also given opportunities that showed a lot of talent and potential. And this process with Holly started in 2017 when she finished playing, and she made herself available into a referee course. And during that course, the questions that she asked and her knowledge of the game and her inquisitive way of and talking about the game immediately raised attention with Bob Easton, who was then presenting that course, and he raised that with me. I followed up to go and watch Holly referee at the start of her career, and the talent was so obvious that it couldn't be ignored. And Holly was offered a contract by myself from my position as the referee commissioner with Scottish Rugby then. And we had a high performance unit with the other boys, Mike Adamson, Sam Grove-White, and others in the group, and we started a high performance development program. I then left Scottish Rugby, and her development continued within Scottish Rugby. We started to give Holly opportunities. We recognized the talent, and we started to give Holly opportunities within URC for refereeing in URC, along with Joy Neville. We recognize that our women referees are just as good in their decision making and processes as the men are. They reached the physical pillar demands for the games in URC, and we were pleased to explore. And Holly has really, and Joy as well, I must also add that, has done that as well. World Rugby started the process and appointed Alhambra Neves as the manager for women's rugby specifically. And we have a duty to also support, to develop and grow our women's referees. And Holly has really, with Joy, was at the forefront of things and breaking ground into the men's world. And then Holly continues with that. To the point that we've appointed her to 2 of our quarterfinals in the last 2 years. And she has refereed that to a standard that we were really, really pleased. And that was the opportunity for World Rugby to see how she's doing in top high performance games. In quarterfinals were under pressure in the men's game. And she got an opportunity to referee South Africa and Portugal as her first Tier 1 game. And that was the world champions' first game back in international rugby that was given to Holly to referee that game. She's now had games with South Africa and Italy, and Holly is growing into a referee that shows a lot of potential to reach a men's World Cup final as a referee. And hopefully in 2 years' time, the development of Holly has got to a stage that she will make it to the next World Cup. So I am fully confident in the talent and potential that I've seen with Holly from her early days. And to where she is now, and the process, and how she's grown, and how she's responded to all the challenges. The players love Holly. If you talk to South African players, if you talk to teams that she referees, she's got such a nice touch with her. Maybe the players are still a bit, are they talking to their sister? Are they talking to their mom? Maybe that helps a little bit in the environment. But to be honest, they treat Holly as a referee and not as a woman. They respect her as a referee and not as a woman referee in the men's environment. I've experienced the teams as really positive, and we in URC have started our next challenge of where's our next Holly coming from. So we have a contenders panel where we've identified girls within our territories that we would give attention over the next 2 to 3 years to see if they can reach the threshold where we are comfortable to bring them into our environment. So where will Holly go? I tell you what, everything that's been given to her she's so quick into respond and develop and understand what the needs are. And she's got such high performance intellect that she applies in her development, that I believe that Holly is someone that can go to a men's World Cup. There's a lot of things that needs to fall in place for a referee to get to a men's World Cup final, but that she will make it to a World Cup as a referee, I've got no doubt that it will. Maybe next World Cup, maybe the World Cup after that. But Holly is a special talent.
It must be a certain amount of pride for you personally that you've identified this talent and then you've seen them come on so far.
Yeah. There's a lot of pride. There's a lot of the bottle of wine that wins the gold medal only have the one winemaker's name on it, but it's a lot of people that contribute to the success of that prize-winning wine. Yeah. And it's the same with referees. There's a lot of people and there's a lot of input along the way into a career, and it's not always recognized. And there's a lot of people that help in the development of referees in many ways. Physical and strength and conditioning coaches and behavior coaches that look at their behaviors. And we had in Scotland, we had a behavior coach. He knows nothing about rugby. He's just looking at the body language and the behaviors of the referees. How do they respond under pressure? Why are their tone going up and stuff? So there's a lot of people that contributes to the success to get to the end anyway. And it's not an easy road. It takes, if you have a talent like Holly, it takes 7 years to get to this level. And if you have exceptional talent, it will probably be 5 to 7 years. But there's a lot of people. But we are all proud of Holly's performances and how she's grown as a referee. But it's not down to one person. It is a combination of a lot of people that support and help to get the best match officials to the top end. And sometimes you're just fortunate that your path cross an exceptional talent. That what happened with me when I came into Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed, Tapper, for your superb answers, and to Adam for another superbly organised media roundtable. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, Neil. Guys, if there's any more questions, now's the time to ask. But I didn't see any hands go while Neil's questions were being answered, so I assume silence is golden. Tapa, thank you very much for taking time out. I know it's a busy day of the week for you in terms of everything that goes on in the match officials world. And to everyone else, listen, thank you very much as always for the interest in covering the competition and getting to sort of understand the nuances around the match officials. It really helps. The more you guys know, the more the fans end up knowing them, and that helps actually with match officials, and they are always going to get a bit of flack. Our job is to try and educate people as much as we can to deflect that. So thanks again for all the interest.